in California, as we continue to talk about the Washington Post's expose revealing how President Trump disclosed highly classified intelligence to Russian officials last week. I want to go to Donald Trump when he was campaigning for president. Here he is last September.
We also need the best protection of classified information. That is the worst situation. Hillary's private email scandal, which put our classified information in the reach of our enemies, disqualifies her from the presidency.
We're joined now by two guests. In London, Scott Horton's with us, lecturer at Columbia Law School, contributing editor at Harper's Magazine, author of Lords of Secrecy, The National Security Elite in America's Stealth Warfare. Still with me here at Stanford University is Larry Diamond of the Hoover Institution and the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies at Stanford. Scott Horton, your response to, well, what President Trump said before he was president and what he reportedly talked to the Russians about the day after he fired the FBI director, James Comey.
Well, on one level, it's just a remarkable display of hypocrisy, of course. I mean, we have him pledging to be very cautious in the management of national security information, and criticizing his rival ruthlessly over this, and on the other hand, behaving in a very cavalier fashion with the most serious sorts of secrets. But I'd say both of these incidents, that is the investigation into the Clinton emails and the controversy now surrounding this meeting with Kislyak and Lavrov in the Oval Office, also serve to demonstrate an important feature of the way the classification system operates. That is, it exists to bind and tie those well down the list of authority. But as we approach the apex of the system, involving cabinet officers and the president and the vice president, there's actually much less constraint. The president has an absolute right to declassify anything. If he shares information, you could say it would be deemed declassified. So we can get out of the way immediately the question of illegality. So there's no illegality in what he's done, yet it may be a breathtaking betrayal. And going back to the things that Larry Diamond said, I think very correctly earlier, it does raise very fundamental questions about his judgment, and it does raise some legal issues, but they're at the highest level. They're at the level of legality that goes to his oath of office, his pledge to uphold the Constitution and laws and preserve, protect, and defend the United States, and that is impeachment territory.
So talk more about when this happened. What was it? A day after President Trump fired James Comey. So certainly very much in the spotlight. According to reports, even he was surprised at the level of blowback for his action. And then the pictures coming out at the White House of him, laughing with his Russian colleagues. Talk about the timing of this.
Well, that is the second most striking thing. I mean, that he agrees to have a meeting in the Oval Office where it's literally the only major scheduled event on his calendar the day after he has fired James Comey. And immediately after, he gave an interview to Lester Holt in which he acknowledged that he was firing Comey because, in the first instance, because of his concerns about the Russia probe that the FBI was carrying out. So I would say the visuals are astonishing. But then when we get into that meeting that occurred, notably with Sergei Kislyak, who, of course, is a leading Russian spy master in the United States, and Lavrov, who is the senior architect of President Putin's foreign policy. That meeting is occurred allowing Russian media to come into the Oval Office while excluding American media. And then the whole flavor of that media, as was transmitted in that meeting, as it was transmitted in the Russian media, was jovial, gregarious, backslapping, friendly, open. That contrasts rather sharply with almost every meeting that Trump has had with major allies, with the Australian Prime Minister, with Angela Merkel, with Theresa May, and on and on and on. Those meetings have been touchy, difficult, usually have involved a great deal of friction and challenge. So I think it's fair for everybody to look at this contrast and ask what is going on here. And what marks this just extraordinary attitude that Trump has towards Russia, which in the Quadrennial Review is still viewed as America presenting the greatest security threat to the United States.
Part of this is about the U.S. and Russia having an alliance against ISIS. Is Trump being criticized through a Cold War lens here, Scott?
Well, I think we have to be careful about that, and there certainly is there's an element of that, and the criticism that comes up inside the Washington Beltway, particularly the criticism that comes from neocons. But I don't think that explains the problem altogether. I think when we look more closely at the situation in the Middle East, there's a context that has to be taken into account, and that is that Russia is very tightly aligned with Iran and with President Assad in Syria. And while we have mutual enemies, we also don't have the same friends, not by a long shot. There is a very, very clear friction and distance between the U.S. position and the Russian position throughout the region, and particularly in Syria. So I think if we step back, we would say that, pursuing a closer collaborative stance with Russia in operations in Syria, that's a perfectly fair thing to pursue. Sharing intelligence would be a reasonable thing to do in pursuing that relationship. But the way things occurred and are being reported now in the Washington Post is, nevertheless, it's shocking. It's, in a word, it's reckless.